Thank you so much, Selena. Great to see everybody here on the Pre-Med Experience. It's our third annual presentation, and we're super excited to have you. I'm very excited for our first keynote speaker, who's Dr. Austin Chiang. You guys might know him from his social media pages on TikTok and Instagram. He is an interventional gastroenterologist, endoscopist, and the chief medical officer at Medtronic GI. And so he has a whole host of experience in his history, in his medical journey that he's super excited to share with you. And I can go on and on about his history and all of the incredible things he's done, but I think that the presentation is going to speak for itself. And we have about 1 hour for this session. And so at the end, any questions that you have for Dr. Chiang, just keep putting them in the Q&A portion below. And we're going to try to get to as many as we can towards the end if we have time. So Dr. Chiang, if you don't mind just pulling up your slides and we can get started.
Okay, can everyone see my screen here? Hopefully everyone can see it.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for that introduction. And hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your Saturday morning, wherever you are, for joining us. I am so excited. I can't tell you enough how excited I am to speak with all of you. It's one of my favorite things to do is, speak with up and coming aspiring doctors. And so without further ado, let me just get into my unexpected medical journey and go through a little bit about my career here. So if I can advance my slide, hopefully this works. All right, some disclosures here. So as Dan mentioned, I have a pretty interesting career to share with you all. Not only have I followed kind of the traditional medical path of becoming an interventional gastroenterologist, practicing in an academic medical center, but I'm also an executive at the biggest medical device company in the world, Medtronic, and I'll discuss kind of how I got there. And then there's this whole social media side quest that I've been on as well for over the past decade that has definitely played into my career, and I can go into that a little bit as well. So it's been a really interesting journey. Never in a million years did I think that I would have all these different headlines where the word TikTok or the platform TikTok would be associated with my name, but this is how things unfolded. And I think unlike some of the other talks that you may hear about, where there's career guidance or, how to position yourself for interviews or, how to optimize your, academic experience in preparation for this whole medical journey, I want to really talk about my just kind of looking back the past 20 years. If I had to put myself back in your shoes, every step of the way, kind of what I've learned from those parts of my journey. And this actually took me down memory lane. I went down this whole path of, finding photos from my past and reminding myself of like how I felt in those moments. So I'll get to that in a little bit. That'll be the first half. And the second half is really diving into the past 3.5 years of how my career really took a left turn. And that's the exciting part because that's really what I think separated me from a lot of my colleagues. And it's given me a really interesting perspective into healthcare that I can't wait to share with you all. So how did I get here in the first place? I think when people see my career, they kind of assume that it just happened overnight, but it definitely didn't. I went down the whole traditional medical pathway, just like you all are getting ready to do as well, or are in the process of doing. But a little bit about myself, I grew up in Southern California, and then kind of unusual from a lot of other folks, I actually moved abroad from the US to Taiwan when I was 10, and I went to an international school in Taiwan for middle school and high school. I then went to Duke for undergrad, which I'm assuming many of you are at that stage. And then I did med school at Columbia, did my internal medicine residency for another 3 years after that, staying at Columbia in New York City. And then I moved to Boston and I did my gastroenterology fellowship. So it's a subspecialty within internal medicine at Brigham and Women's, which is one of the Harvard hospitals. During that 3-year fellowship, I did something kind of interesting. I also did another fellowship within that in bariatric endoscopy, which are these really novel weight loss procedures. And I also got a master's in public health. And part of the reason why I was able to do that was because that fellowship was structured in a way that it was very front loaded. Everything was, all the kind of clinical training was in the first year. And the second and third year were mainly meant for research and doing other things. And so that's why I had another degree in public health. And then finally, I did a third and final fellowship, which was my seventh year out of med school, in advanced endoscopy. And I want to talk just a really short bit about that. So about gastroenterology, look, when I started med school, when I was in your shoes, considering medicine even, I had no idea what gastroenterology was about. I thought that it was just about guts and poop and bloating and acid reflux, kind of the common things, but really that's not what attracted me about the field. And so, for those of you who don't know what gastroenterology is about, it is about the gut and all the organs there. It's not just about the intestines, it's also about the pancreas and the liver, and there's so much variety, and that's what makes it interesting. I became an interventional gastroenterologist, so I have to wear lead, and there's a lot of procedures done under live X-ray, which is why we look like this sometimes. And some of the procedures that we do are, this is a procedure where we basically take a scope, it goes through the mouth all the way down into the first part of the small intestine, and we use ultrasound to look at a tumor in the pancreas. So anyone who has a pancreatic mass or suspected pancreatic cancer, we're the ones who diagnose it by putting a needle into it and taking some samples out. And we're actually the ones who have to deliver the news to the patients as well. Whenever that cancer causes a blockage of certain structures in that area, we're also the ones to open it up with metal stents and things like that. So that's the whole idea behind interventional gastroenterology, is that we have to perform these types of interventions. And I don't expect any of you to know any of this, but this is really complicated. We can, place metal stents between different hollow organs to get to where we need to go, and be really creative with that. And like I mentioned, I did training in some weight loss procedures as well. And so there's been a novel technique over the past decade where we can actually go in through the mouth, not through the skin, to sew down the stomach and help people lose weight by restricting the volume of the stomach. Of course, this has to be done in conjunction with, lifestyle modifications and a lot of, other types of guidance and therapy as well. But it's interesting how technology has really advanced this space and allowed us to go into other areas within medicine, like obesity. And then the final thing that I'll mention about gastroenterology that many of you might not know about is that, the whole point, a lot of what we try to do in medicine and healthcare is try to make things safer and less invasive for patients. So this whole field of doing things through the mouth has also created opportunities to carve out early tumors or early cancers so that surgeons don't have to go in and snip out a whole section of your bowel. And so that over the past couple of years, we've been able to refine our technique to be able to carve out these early tumors and early cancers. And trigger warning, I'm going to show you a picture of what it looks like here. This can be, carving out these tumors can take hours and hours and takes a lot of training. But it's something that we've been doing only for the past couple of years, and in the future, who knows where this is going to go. And that's why technology plays a big role in helping spare organs and, make things safer. And this will be relevant later in the talk, because clearly right now I also kind of bridge the gap between not only doing the procedures and helping patients, but also being on the technology innovation side as well. All right, so I wanted to, like I said, get into my own journey, and a lot of this is going to sound like life lessons, but really I wanted to share with you just a little bit of history, from my perspective when I was in your shoes. So when I was pre-med, these are all very, very blurry photos because back then we had cameras that weren't as great as they are now. But one thing that I really had to remind myself throughout at every point in the way really was that there have been many, many people who have gone through the same process. And if those people could make it through, you can too. And we all started somewhere. We all went through a very similar experience, not exactly the same experience as each and every one of you, but many of us, as you probably heard in past years from Dr. Martin or Dr. Grunch, we had to go through the same process, and we had a lot of the same uncertainties and questions. And so for me, this was my freshman year dorm room. I dug this photo out of, I don't know where, Facebook or something. And when I look back, I had to spend a lot of time finding my true self. And I know that sounds super hokey, but it is so important because without actually coming to terms with your own priorities and what's important to you, you won't be able to really live up to your truest, most authentic self and your highest potential, which is so important. And so, for me, when I look at this photo, it's wild. I was concealing so much about my own identity, things that were getting in my way, including like my sexuality. And I think that was such a big barrier for me to that I needed to overcome over time. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of self-reflection. The other thing is you'll gain more by helping others. When I was in college, I often thought that I was just trying to make myself better in so many ways and trying to get through the academic year, and it was all about me, 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 me. But there were some opportunities that I was involved with. Sometimes friends would get me involved in volunteering experiences, and this is a photo from me being co-leading a organization where we helped create a summer camp for local underserved students that the schools can nominate to spend a whole week with us and dissecting sheep brains and building robots. And in doing so, it really just inspired me and motivated me to continue doing what I'm doing because it wasn't all about me, and it was about kind of giving me a glimpse into what I could be doing in the future. And I'm sure many of you are involved in activities like this as well. One other thing is that, again, we're so caught up in ourselves, don't forget to look around you. We're surrounded by so many incredible classmates and colleagues along the way at every step of the way. And when I think back to like this photo that I took, many of you, I don't know if any of you know who this is, but JJ Redick was a big basketball player. Duke was a big basketball, school. I'm not a huge, basketball fan, college basketball fan in particular, but JJ Redick was like the star of the show in college, and now he's the coach of the Lakers. And you just never know who you might come across. And so take those opportunities to say hi, get to know them, and learn from them. And also take a moment to really acknowledge and cherish the moments of the people you're with around you, because you never know what might happen. Now that it's been 20 years out of college, there have been some of my college classmates who are no longer with us for whatever reason. This friend of mine, in the middle of the picture here, she unfortunately, passed a couple of years ago. And, it makes you really wonder and put things into perspective, like how precious this time that we have together is. I would also say play to your strengths. Interestingly, I grew up playing the violin. I started at age 3, kind of stereotypical in some ways. But growing up, I recognized that I was decent at playing the violin, but I didn't know if I didn't feel like it was on my own terms. And when I went to college, I finally could do it on my own terms. And I felt like, okay, now that I am able to do this myself, I'm pretty good at it. I think it distinguishes me from other people. I'm gonna keep going at it. And so I kept going at it with that, and it ended up leading to so many interesting opportunities. I became concertmaster of the symphony at Duke. I actually continued playing well into medical school and chamber groups, which I never thought I would because I thought I hated that like years ago. And it's actually ended up opening up so many different conversations along the way, even through the whole medical training like process, like interviews when I'm interviewing for residency or fellowship or my first job. This has come up so many times. And when you're able to speak to things like that, I think it's a bonus to showing you off as a well-rounded person or just a person in general outside of your academic achievements. I think another important message is that you don't have to be number one every single time. I know we're all striving to be the best at what we do and we're striving for excellence, but I was never at the very top of my class. Despite when you look back at my history, it sounds like these big ivory tower names, but I was never at the top of my class. And I think when you put so much pressure on yourself to be that, it can get in your way and it can backfire. And just know that, you don't have to be that in order to be successful or to get what you want out of life. This is a really cheesy analogy, but if you think about all the successful people out there that you admire, whether it's athletes or celebrities or singers or artists or whoever it might be, none, some of them, there are very few that you can say are actually number one, but there's a lot of people out there who have achieved a lot. And so you don't need to necessarily be, at the very top. And being at the top sometimes comes with a price. So I'll get into that in a little bit as well. And you can always have a comeback. I think part of the beauty of even, medical training is that like you go through med school, you go through residency, fellowship, there's all these stages where you can kind of recreate yourself. You can start fresh every single time. You might have felt like, man, college years were really rough for me. And for me, actually, it was kind of like that, like my first few years in college weren't that great. And I sort of things ramped up later on in my college years. But again, like when I went to med school, I felt like, okay, I'm starting fresh. I'm starting where everyone else is starting. You can always have a comeback. And the reason why I threw this up is like, the Von Dutch hat here. I know it's kind of back like over the past year or two. And it's so weird to think because like 20 years ago, it was a thing. And then it suddenly became like no one wanted it anymore. And then it sort of had a comeback. And so that's why this photo reminded me of that. All right. Then I want to get into my med school years a little bit. This is from my white coat ceremony. So again, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no clear direction of where I was going at all, what I wanted to do in med school. I didn't decide on GI until far, far later. So I really went in with an open mind. And again, this is a really blurry photo, but these are my classmates and I. Right before the week before med school, we had like this kind of orientation week, and we all went to the beach in Coney Island and spent some time with each other, just getting to know each other. Another important lesson is to, compete with only yourself. There's going to be so many times where you feel like, oh, I gotta just like, you know, everyone's comparing each other to one another. And I will tell you that we all come out with different priorities, and everyone, just because somebody is going into a more competitive field, doesn't necessarily mean that they will be more successful or happier or anything like that in the future as well. So that theme will, I think, come up over and over as we go on through this. And just remember, you're not alone. Like I said, many, many people have gone through this process before you. And I try to remind myself every single time. And I think it is important to try to find a core group of people to lean on and realize that you're not in this alone. These are two of my, closest friends in med school. My roommate is on the left here. His name is actually Austin as well. He's now a pediatric cardiologist. Stephanie on the right became an orthopedic surgeon, a hand surgeon in California. And they, kept me grounded. We were very open and honest about, what our struggles, our feelings, like what we needed help with. And we were always there for each other. And we had a great time as a result. And like I said, everyone's priorities will end up being different. So just because people choose to go into a certain specialty or choose to do something with their career doesn't make it any better or any lesser than anyone else. We all went in very, very different directions. And in fact, my friend here on the left, Rich, he actually was a music major. His passion is actually music. And he decided to, pursue medicine kind of as a job, which is totally fine. Like everyone treats medicine as a job. But his was like, this is a means to an end. My true passion is in music. I will help people along the way, but it just enables me to do other things that I like to do, which is, I think, a totally fine approach. Not everybody has to make their career their entire lives, and just keep that in mind. I think that was one of the academic faculty I came across along the way who also said something similar to me. And I was like, yeah, it's not all that bad that you don't have to make this every aspect of your life. It doesn't have to be everything that defines you. And one of the encouraging things is that the best memories along the way really have nothing to do with school. I mean, a lot of the memories I created with my classmates um, came out of being, in this whole journey in medicine, but had nothing to do with the actual, medical process. So my friends getting married, my best friend Stephanie from med school, like we all went out to Paris, which was amazing for her wedding. Part of our med school curriculum on the upper right here was actually spending a day a week, an afternoon a week, for a semester at the Metropolitan Museum here in New York. So we would go to the museum every week and just sketch. And it, I think, took our minds off medicine a little bit, but at the same time allowed us to see things from a different angle and appreciate art and have that shared experience. And the photo from the very bottom left was, I went with another friend from med school to Costa Rica, and that's me ziplining. It looks cool, but I was so scared. That's really not the usual MO that I have. And on the bottom right actually is whenever people ask me what my favorite thing about med school is, it was this rotation in primary care, which I had no desire to go into that field at all. But I was placed in New Mexico on the Navajo reservation. And with the small group of classmates I was with, we were encouraged every Wednesday and Friday afternoon to not be in the hospital, to just go out and explore. And with that, we went to the Grand Canyon, we went to Arches in Utah. We basically took these trips every weekend to other places to explore. And it became the most memorable piece of med school. And it had nothing to do with school itself, but I think it was just so formative to, again, be able to broaden my horizons and give me a different perspective. And I'm so, so grateful for that. So there's a lot of things to look forward to along the way that are great perks and great experiences that have nothing to do with the actual training. And like I said, thousands have gone through this, and so will you. This is a photo I took. I mean, check out that photo of me holding a camera. It's like before actual selfies. I was interviewing at, I think, Northwestern or somewhere in Chicago for residency. And so I took this photo, in front of the bean in Chicago, when I was going through that process. And remember, everyone has their internal struggle, but it does get better. People look at me today and they're like, wow, you've done so much. Everything is so great. And, they even look at different milestones along the way, like me graduating from med school. This photo is from the night of me graduating from med school. And I will tell you, that night was probably one of the roughest nights I've had in my life. It was a mixture of just this crisis of like, thinking about what's to come and all that uncertainty. And yes, I was like happy to be done with med school, but I was also worried about the next step. And I was constantly chasing this next step feeling like, okay, I'm not going to celebrate this because there's all this to come and I'm worrying about it. And on top of that, I was in an argument with my parents that night. And even though it's all smiles here, it was a really rough night. And I can only say that, 20 years later, things have gotten so much better. My relationships with people have matured. Like time does heal a lot of wounds. And so just know that whatever circumstances you're in now will evolve and will change and you'll mature and things will get better. All right, moving on to residency, which is arguably the toughest, most strenuous time in my life. It will feel like a blur. And sometimes that's a good thing because there are certain memories that are best, kept in the past. But residency was pretty rough. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. But I kind of knew what I was getting myself into because I stayed at the same place where I had done med school. These are my co-residents who I basically rotated in the same group with, and we ended up relying on each other a lot. And part of the reason why I want to, shout them out is because, there are times when you work in healthcare in general, emotions are always high, right? It's a stressful environment and people get angry at you for no reason. And these three people next to me really stood up for me at times where I was getting, where we were in tough spots. And sometimes, people would blame each other for doing things they didn't do. And so they really backed me up. And they've all gone on to have amazing careers, of their own as well. But we were so tired, and yet we had a lot of fun. I mean, this is a picture of us going out to brunch after a whole like 24-hour, shift, and people were falling asleep at the table. But I just want to say that these moments, even though they were so rough, they made for the best stories. Like that's one way to think about it is, now that I look back, like it's often the fact that we went through it together and we were so, we're so happy that we had that like bonding experience over that. And so these are just photos from the, from either us rounding, preparing for rounds in the morning on the upper left to just, literally napping in the middle of the night during residency. And hopefully things have gotten better since then, because these are photos from like, over 10 years ago. Um, but everyone is figuring out their next steps. I mean, all of us didn't know what we were doing. Some people will say, yeah, I absolutely know what I'm doing for the next, in the future, but you can't plan out the future. And you'll see like how my career has really transformed. And that's the exciting part, like in the past 3 years. Everything up until that point has sort of been predictable, and I was on this assembly line, but you just never know what left turns your career will take in the future. And everyone is trying to figure out their next steps. So this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. I started doing some random things in residency, and I remember entering this random contest on Twitter, actually, of all places, before Twitter was really a big thing in healthcare, where they were seeking ideas for healthcare applications in Google Glass. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, you know what? I'll just submit an idea. I think it's fun. My idea was kind of like this whole video library type of thing. Anyway, I became a finalist. I went to Boston and presented this thing. And, it wasn't my idea that was really cool. It was actually going there. And actually, I was so unprepared. Everyone else had this whole like pitch deck, like they were actually pitching an actual business idea. And I just showed up with my idea and I just like went up to the podium and said it. And what's weird is that it opened my eyes to this whole different world outside of clinical medicine that I had no idea people were involved with. And it just sort of like piqued my interest. And with that, I started exploring other things. And one of the things was also, I've always been curious about how people receive their medical knowledge through the news, through the media. Like, social media is so common now, but like 10, 15 years ago, people were getting a lot of their information from the, nightly news or from TV shows. And who gets to decide what ends up on those shows? I wanted to find out what that process was about. So I spent some time at ABC News, spent some time behind the scenes in their medical team, working, vetting the news, vetting all the kind of press releases, and helping decide what ends up on the nightly news, whether it's World News Tonight, or on Good Morning America, or if there's a story that they're talking about on The View, like helping guide that conversation. And so I was exposed to a lot of interesting people in that process. And for those of you who might not know, this is Diane Sawyer. She used to be the anchor of the nightly news on World News Tonight. And then on the right here is Dr. Rich Besser. He used to be the chief medical editor for ABC News. And he's made for TV. You can see here he's like tall and tan, and he has a great like way about him on TV. And I used to think he was just made for that role. And I remember asking him, like, hey, is this like what you always wanted to do? Like you kind of are made for this job. And I'm sure there's tons of people who like want to be him. And he's like, no, absolutely not. This is not what I wanted to do with my life. And in fact, it's not going to be what I'm going to do with my life. And I thought that was really interesting because he also had a really interesting career where I think he's a pediatrician, and he ended up being the CDC director for a little bit. And then he went into this job. And sure enough, a few years later, he left ABC and is now the president of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is the biggest philanthropy out there. And and so he really, is now involved with deciding like what sort of research projects to fund out there, especially in our current environment right now, current political environment. I think the role that his organization has a big impact on, deciding how to help certain causes in the future. So he certainly has had a huge impact, now that he's in that role. And as I moved on to fellowship, there's only one slide for this one, but this is where I, started focusing on my clinical interest. So just to go back a little bit, I thought I was open to doing any field when I went into med school. I didn't know if I wanted to be a plastic surgeon or an ophthalmologist or a neurologist. And those were literally all things that I had considered. I even thought I might be an orthopedic surgeon at one point. And I tried to follow my gut and really trust my instincts like along the way. So when I did my internal medicine rotation, that's when I felt like, wow, I really jive with these people. And I really admired the residents I was working with. And that's what really led me into that field. But even in internal medicine, I thought that I was going to go into being a critical care doctor. And so when I applied to residency, I said, hey, I want to be a critical care doctor. But there was a part of me that always wanted to be a proceduralist and like kind of do something like surgical. And so as soon as I started residency, I switched my interest into interventional cardiology, the doctors who treat heart attacks and things like that. And there's a lot of innovation in that space because so much can be done without open heart surgery. So much can be done now just through someone's wrist or someone's groin. And so I was really interested in that. But then I also started noticing that all of my best friends in residency were going into gastroenterology, and it was a field that I never really entertained at all. And I started looking into what interventional gastroenterologists do, and I was like, wow, that's like there's so much cool innovation and technology and so much variety in the organs. I want to do that. And I do not regret that decision at all because I've met like my people in terms of like the folks I really get along with. And I couldn't be happier with kind of the path that I took. And even when I was in fellowship this time, after residency, like I had mentioned early on in the talk, I took some time to do a master's in public health. I also, interestingly, again, was given an opportunity to work with a startup company. And, without getting into details of what that startup does, just to say that it, again, opened my eyes into what was possible outside of the traditional clinical medical path and just being a practicing doctor. So that sort of rounds out my whole training process. And this is where things again start to shift and I go off in a new direction and what ultimately led me to my role as chief medical officer of one of the businesses at Medtronic today. So this is the headline that you may have noticed earlier. And just to really quickly say, like, kind of what Medtronic does and what we do in the gastroenterology space that makes it so cool. So basically, medical devices, we have developed a couple different things that, these tools that doctors use to diagnose and treat patients. And, some of these you may have seen or have heard of. The pill camera is a capsule, basically the size of a pill that takes pictures all along the intestine to help diagnose certain things like bleeding in the gut. We also have AI during colonoscopy. Everyone needs a colonoscopy when they turn 45. And the AI can basically help identify precancerous things that doctors might miss. There's other tools that we have towards the bottom here that, this photo of me, the old versus the new, we're trying to make things more patient-friendly and comfortable. There's a lot of hardware that patients have to, deal with for these testing that we can try to make more compact and innovate like that. And then on the very bottom right here is a spray that we can, if there's a bleeding lesion in the gut, you can use this spray to basically form this gel, this adhesive gel that basically seals the bleeding area and helps it heal. So a lot of different, innovations that we're working on on that side of my job. So I want to get into some of the people who inspired me along the way. And, these folks that I look back on in my career are not necessarily all people who had a direct mentorship role in my career. Many of them, like Dr. Eve Slater on the left here, literally just said one thing in passing that changed everything. So interestingly, Dr. Eve Slater, she's had an incredible career. She was the first female chief resident at Mass General, one of the Harvard hospitals. And she ended up, practicing there, being faculty there. Then she went into pharmaceuticals. And then from there, she ended up being the #2 person in healthcare in the US. She became the Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. This was like maybe 15, 20 years ago. Um, and then after that, she was like, you know what? I'm done with government. I've seen it all. I'm gonna go back and help the residents at Columbia. And that's when I met her. And she actually invited me to dinner one day. And she just said, you know what? I just, in talking to you, feel like just think about your career in a more global way. Don't just think of it as like the traditional one-to-one patient interaction. And I was like, I have no idea what that means, but I'm gonna pocket that and like save that for later. Dr. Chris Thompson was a direct mentor of mine. And it wasn't, I tell him this today, his influence on me wasn't in the direct training in gastroenterology, but rather he has multiple startups on the side where he's also inventing things. And that just opened my eyes to a lot of other things as well. Dr. Steve Klasko was the CEO of Jefferson Health, the hospital that I work at, and he created a social media role for me when I was there to work with the whole health system, which I'll get into in a little bit. But he was also a huge influence. And then finally, Gio DiNapoli was the boss I used to have at Medtronic, who first hired me. And it was a very fateful phone call where he actually texted me and said, "Hey, do you have a moment to talk?" I had no idea who this man was. And I got on the phone with him and he basically offered me this once in a lifetime type of job that really took me down a different path. And come to think of it, he actually had been observing my life for a bit and my career and seeing kind of seeing how it unfolded. And that's why he reached out to me for that role. All right, I'm looking at time and I know I'm gonna like jump ahead a little bit here in the interest of time. But I do want to talk a little bit about, you know, the social media piece of this in a little bit too. But basically, it's interesting how this experience that I've had on the clinical side with all my medical training has really played into my current role as chief medical officer at this company. But also the social media piece of it has taught me a lot about communication and how to distill a complex idea into a 15-second soundbite. And it's also kind of taught me about, people management because I ended up founding a nonprofit to help educate other health professionals on how to use social media at one point. So here's a little bit about my strange social media journey. I have been a social media fan for a long time, even before all the common platforms. Many of you probably have no idea what these are, but they're like basically the grandfathers of Facebook, which really ages me. But then I took it upon myself. Again, I had an interest in understanding how people receive their medical information. And obviously, I had identified a lot of like inaccurate misinformation online. And so I started thinking about like, how do I potentially position myself as an authority one day to share my experience online? And I do this on every single platform with no help, all by myself. And I do less on like YouTube, for instance, now because these are old screenshots, but I don't have time anymore for YouTube, but I used to do YouTube and create my own thumbnails and edit all my own videos. But again, the purpose behind all of this was really to share my experience and be a source of good information. And I also learned along the way how to craft that message to different audiences on different platforms, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Instagram, etc. And so very quickly how it unfolded, I had this interest in social media. I actually started doing research in social media to make it also an academic pursuit because a lot of people question my purpose. Like as I was going through training, there were a lot of naysayers along the way, and I had to sort of package it in a way that they understood that, hey, social media is important to healthcare, and we kind of take that for granted today. I ended up assisting a lot of our professional gastroenterology societies with their social media presence and getting them off the ground. And then I was given this role in when I was full-time practicing to help with social media efforts and social media policy and campaigns at the hospital, which was granted to me by the CEO of that hospital. And then I started a nonprofit to help other health professionals use social media responsibly and effectively. And you have to think that like now we sort of take it for granted, but it was really the pandemic that catalyzed this whole conversation and got the platforms themselves, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, to really appreciate the role that social media has on public health and healthcare. And at that point, that's why I started talking to, had these contacts and these platforms would reach out to me for help. And so I still currently work a bit with YouTube, a lot with LinkedIn, and it's still an evolving space. You all know that these platforms are constantly rolling out new features and things like that. This I'm gonna just leave up for a quick second here, but there's so many different paths you can take in medicine, and your value with medical experience can be applied to so much more than just one-on-one patient care. When people think about like industry, they often think like pharmaceuticals or they think like medical devices, like what I'm doing. And even within that, there's a lot of different roles. And then we also think about like all the, social media doctors and clinicians and nurses. There's a lot of, opportunity there too, but there's so much more even outside of that, whether it's in the public sector, like in politics, in legislation, in, public health and things like that, that you can potentially get involved with. And I really feel like we're seeing this trend where more and more of us are being tapped to help out with those efforts. And really, honestly, I don't know how this whole ecosystem went without our input as clinicians for so long. I think there's more of us who need to be able to work outside of our silo of being a practicing clinician to be able to help drive the direction, because so many of these people without medical training are making decisions that are, not well informed. And I mean, we might be seeing some of that play out today with our current, political environment, but just to know that there are opportunities for you as well. And I think this is particularly important because many of you may be hearing about burnout within the medical community. And I think one of the solutions to that is diversifying your experience and, maybe taking on a hybrid career like mine, where you get to do a little bit of everything so that you're not just stuck in one place and in one path. All right. I'll see if I have time to get through some of this, but I did want to take a moment about like explaining like what a medical device is, because most people don't even know. And I'm just gonna, skip through some of this, but it's very interesting to note that all of these, including toothbrushes and sunglasses, are medical devices, with the exception of a fitness app. And also there's certain things like hyaluronic acid, which at one point was considered a medical device, but is no longer, because it actually has certain chemical properties that kind of make it more like a pharmaceutical. And the reason why I bring up like what is a medical device as an important question is because I was never taught this as a pre-med or as a med student, and you would think that we were taught things like this along the way, but we're not. We're so focused on the science and the biology as we go through med school that we're not really looking at like the other pieces of healthcare that make healthcare run. And I encourage you all to really look outside at the rest of the ecosystem as you're going through training, because there's so much that impacts healthcare and it impacts patient care that we're not involved with, that again, we could be involved with. So I'm going to skip through this real quick, but just to know that there's a whole process to get new medical technology approved. Here, I want to make sure that we have time to address some questions that you might have. I will say that, there's, for any of you creatives who want to invent things in the future, there's a way to get your ideas from a concept through prototyping, testing, to actually getting a product out there to help patients. And even then, that's the first step, because there are so many more things that have to happen after something has been approved by the FDA to be able to kind of promote adoption across all clinicians out there, across the country, across the world. There's a lot of efforts that actually need to happen in order to make that work. And there's so many bits and pieces. Everyone always says it takes a village to get this to happen, to get a new technology or device out there to start impacting patients. And just to show you that there's all these different functions, whether it's regulatory to get it to the FDA, or a health economics reimbursement team to make sure that somehow there's a system to pay for this, because nothing comes for free. That there are, folks dedicated to operations to making sure that supply chain, very relevant conversation today with all the tariffs and whatnot. Where do we source all the different parts to be able to make the device? Because we rely on devices and technology to be able to perform the care that we want for our patients. And so all the decisions that you hear about in the news right now, that has a direct impact on really our ability to take care of patients too. And so it all is related. Now, people often ask me what my role as chief medical officer is. I know some of you probably had that question as well. And the long story short version of this is that there's no central definition for what a chief medical officer is. I, in fact, had to Google it before I took my job. And a lot of the results on Google are actually chief medical officers of hospitals and health systems. But for a technology company, it's a little bit different. Some of it is internal facing, helping provide medical input into the innovation process. And a lot of it is actually just you know, external facing, trying to get the message out to patients and the general public and doctors and nurses. And so my role is kind of a combination of both. And I will say I am so blessed to be able to do a lot of this in different ways, or I get to be involved in the process in so many different ways. I get to manage certain teams like medical education, all the programs that we put on to educate doctors how to use our products. Um, be training. I lead the team that basically trains all the sales reps on how to explain how to use these products. And I'm also involved in every conversation that we have with startups to determine whether or not these are good ideas that we might want to, take on and distribute for the whole country or the world. And I have a glimpse into like where medicine is going in the next 5 to 10 years. And I am at the table being able to help drive those decisions and say, hey, I think this is a good idea because there is an unmet need, because there's this challenge that we're trying to fix within healthcare, and say that, okay, that's where I think we should go, where we should invest our resources to be able to make the next cool device or make the next cool technology out there for patient care. So I've been very blessed and be able to see this side of things, and also still be able to practice medicine part-time and still be, active on social media, which isn't always the case. They've given me a lot of leeway to be myself on social media, and I'm very, very grateful. And so, I like to always quote Steve Jobs. He has this quote where essentially, you can't really always connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. And somehow I found myself in this position now, juggling these various hats: doctor, executive, social media personality, and educator. And somehow it all ties together. And when I look back, it makes a lot of sense. But in that process, and you're probably going to feel this way along your journey too, during that journey, it might not feel like it makes any sense, or you might feel sort of lost, but trust me, one day it will come together and it will make sense. And it might not happen at, a certain point in time. Everyone reaches that point at a different time. And even now, I'm still thinking about what my next step might be and like where my future is going to go, because I have a long runway ahead of me here. So my journey has been awesome. I've met so many cool people. These are the teams that I manage at work, but I've gotten so many cool experiences. I got to go to the White House a couple times to be involved in the cancer moonshot conversations. I've been able to, work with great teams in the hospital. I've been able to show, what we do to future doctors. This is on the upper right-hand corner, a bunch of fellows visiting our lab at Medtronic. On the bottom left, I went to Korea to look at how one of our products are made, like in the manufacturing site. I've been able to advocate on Capitol Hill and talk to legislators. This is a surgical robot that we're developing that's not available here yet in the US, but it is in Europe that I've been involved with as well. And then there's also some cool side perks, and I didn't want to take too much time to kind of expand on this, but I got a book deal. I came out with a book called Gut and Owner's Guide with a major publisher last year. And to see it kind of be out there at Barnes and Noble, it's now at Five Below in a paperback edition for $5. It's like, it's been so fulfilling to be able to like get that message out. And again, have a population level impact beyond my one-on-one patient interactions. I spent time with Katie Kirk on the right here, who, for those of you who don't know, she was kind of a TV personality and host of the Today Show in the past, and now like a huge advocate for colorectal cancer. I host a podcast through my work. I speak at these major stages like Aspen Ideas and meet incredible leaders in our healthcare space. Just people I never thought I would be able to meet and connect with. And whether it's an influencer or a government official, it has been so mind-blowing, and I am just eternally grateful for those opportunities. I know I'm coming down on time, and I did want to share a couple pre-med insights, and I'm just going to throw everything on here. So very quickly, let your purpose drive you, not fame, not money. I made a conscious decision when I got on social media that I wasn't going to take any sponsorships. I wasn't going to, make it something that was a source of income for me. There's nothing wrong with that for other people, but just for me, I wanted to keep it just, light and all about education, and that's really served me well. And part of the reason why I ended up getting the job that I can, because they were vetting my social media footprint, and so sticking to that purpose, I think really helped everything shine through. Um, Being honest with yourself, kind of along the same lines. Like I knew I wasn't gonna be like a household name. I knew that wasn't necessarily my goal. I wanted to focus on technology, and that's really what like interested me. And somehow that led me to where I am today. Now, at the same time, the third bullet point, taking risks can be scary but fruitful. I was talking to the chief medical officer of Amazon Pharmacy, and he actually was, we were in training together at one point, and he said, you know what, like we didn't really do anything different from other people. We were just willing to take risks. And that's so true. Like when I was presented with these opportunities, I said yes when others may have said no. And so, taking those risks sometimes can pay off, even if there's a lot of people telling that it's not a good idea or it's not good. Like, but if you believe and that it's serving your purpose, sometimes those risks are worth taking. Communication is everything. That's something I realized in corporate America, is that sometimes we will spend months creating a slide deck to get a story across. And that storytelling ability is what get things done, what makes big decisions. It's all about like convincing people that your idea is good in one way or another. Even with patients, communication is everything, because you're trying to teach and educate and convince someone that to believe what you're saying and that you have their best interests in mind. And so I can't emphasize that point enough, even though it's a very simple point. Everything is a trade-off. I make things maybe look really easy along the way. I've had to sacrifice a lot of things, whether it's my personal life, whether it's time spent with folks, whether it's sleep. But looking back now, I'm at a point where I'm also trying to prioritize my life, because a mentor of mine once said, like, when you have to decide between having to give a talk somewhere versus missing a loved one's birthday or graduation, you should choose the graduation or the birthday, because that happens only once, and that you're going to remember that more than the talk that you give somewhere. So those types of decisions, like, make sure that you make those, everything is a trade-off. So you've got to, something's got to give, and you have to make those decisions. Just very quickly, nothing stays the same. Everything around you changes. Be open-minded about that. Don't burn bridges, because you never know who's going to come back into the picture to help you in some way. I've learned that several times as well. Always consider another perspective. Try to put yourself in the shoes of someone else, whether it's your employee, whether it's your colleague, whether it's the patient. Always consider another perspective. And don't let them fool you. No one will ever know it all. There's a lot of people who will make it sound like they know everything about everything. And trust me, I have imposter syndrome all the time, but I realize every single time that everyone has their own strengths and no one knows it all. And to that point, in the words of Kendrick Lamar, be humble, and that will take you very far if you remain humble and grounded along the way. Now, I know I only left 5 minutes for Q&A, but I want to thank you all for this opportunity. This is one of the, one of the things that I love doing, is chatting with all of you. So hopefully we have a couple minutes to answer any questions that you might have. And of course, here are my socials at the bottom here, if you do want to DM me in private if you're too shy to ask.
Dr. Chang, thank you so much for that presentation. That was incredible, and it's inspirational to see pretty much your entire life journey. We have almost 800 people watching live who clearly like got a lot out of that, as you could see in the chat. And so I'm sure people will be following you on your social media channels like you listed here. And we're grateful that you were able to give this talk today and you decided to do that. And a lot of people were asking questions in the Q&A, and one of the themes that we saw was, when things get difficult, like you were saying, or when there are moments when you're down, like how do you remain inspired or motivated to continue on when like success or whatever that means, like your definition of success or a goal is far off?
Great question. I mean, I think that a couple things. Um, we all have different ways of coping. I think my way has always been, I'm an open book. I always talk openly with my friends. I share how I'm feeling. I recognize that not everybody is like that, but that was a way of me being able to like seek validation and get feedback from others. Now, I will also be very open with everybody. I still struggle with that, you know? And in actuality, I have also been going through therapy too. And I can't emphasize enough how like that might be helpful for some of you. I actually had not been in therapy for a long time, and literally 2 weeks ago, I was like, there's no acute reason for me to be there, but I think that it could help me also deal with some stressors and uncertainty because even to this day, it's uncertain. So, you know, I hate to say that it's always going to be like that, but in a certain way, we will have to always, all of you are in this boat because you are trying to, you're go-getters and you want to do things and you want to do bigger things. And it's that constant search of something that you want to do. And I'm still struggling with that. But I will say, to your point, like when you do have a finite goal in mind and you're trying to get there, I can't, for me at least, what was very reassuring was again, understanding that thousands of people have gone through med school and residency. And I feel like that reminder helped me know that, okay, I can do it too. And, I will continue in this process as rough as it might be. I will get through it and get there one day.
That's incredibly helpful. And also, like another theme, even people like Eliana or Nick or Benham were asking in the chat about balance. And there's a lot going on always in people's lives who want to pursue medicine, whether that's having a social life during medical school or now balance in your career, kind of handling clinical roles and non-clinical roles. How do you ultimately maintain that balance to make sure you prioritize yourself as well?
Great question. It's also a work in progress for me. I think it's going to be an internal work in progress. But at this point in my career, even like through the final several stages of training, I felt like I realized that the work would never be done. I think there was a point in my life, like in college and med school, where like once you're done with the exams, once you're done with all the emails, like you're done and you're free to do whatever. There will come a time in your career, unfortunately, where there's always work that's left over. And you will learn that you just gotta set aside those things at some point and spend some time doing the things that you enjoy. Otherwise, it will make your life really difficult. So this constant shuffling of the deck. Whatever is on top is top priority, and I will deal with that, and the rest will have to wait. And that's true, even to this day. You will never achieve like perfect balance. It's always a juggling act, and there are going to be rough times, and there are going to be chill times. So like the rough times, I always say like, okay, there's going to be weeks where I'm going to be overworking and I'm going to be really exhausted. But then there will come a time where I can really like put things, to the side, have that wait. And you do need those moments to take time off. Because if you think about it, uh, sometimes it takes like a vacation to realize that, you going on vacation really didn't keep the world from spinning. And people, like all those other people who are looking for things from you will survive as well.
Dr. Chang, thank you so, so much for all of your inspiration and advice. And I'm sure everyone here really benefited from hearing it. We really can't thank you enough for all of the time you spent this morning with us. And we wish you all the best. Everyone, make sure to follow Dr. Chang at Austin Chang MP on all of his media platforms.
Yeah, and one last thank you to you all. I'd be happy to address any of your questions one-on-one and let me know that we met here. And Dan, thank you so much. Dan has seen my journey literally you've seen my journey unfold, so you kind of know how this has all gone. And it's also really cool seeing your journey as well, Dan. So congratulations and thank you all. Thanks again.